Hey there. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about how to source fabrics from wholesalers. It is a very common scenario, whether you're new to the industry or more experienced, that when you start looking for a new material to turn an idea into a garment, very often when you find a supplier, they barrage you, they ask you many questions that most people, especially those new to the industry, don't know the answer to. Questions like how heavy the material should be, the type of stretch it should have, the composition, the finishing. So all of these questions, especially if you're new, can be really, really overwhelming. So what is important to do in this case is that to begin with, you really need to know exactly what you're looking for. Exactly what do you want to have made from what type of material, and do as much research about it as possible. So point number one here, or tip number one really, is do your research before you contact anyone. We all live in areas with many shops and retail outlets around us. So try to find something that is another product that is existing already in a shop that you like, that the fabric is similar, if not exactly the same as what you want. And look at the care labels, have a look at what the composition is. Go to other shops, perhaps fabric shops that just open to the public, and speak to the people who work in there and try to find out as much as possible the type of material that you're looking for. What is it called? What is it made of? Any other additional information you can find is really important. And even more important it is, if you can, to get a swatch of that material that you really like or that you are looking for, or something as close as possible to what you have in mind for your product. So whether that is buying a garment that is of similar material, or whether you go to a shop and you ask for a swatch, a sample of what you've seen and liked, it's really important as much as possible to gather information as physical, but also as information gathering. It's really important at this stage. Secondly, once you have done this research, when you contact a mill or an agent representative of the supplier, it is really important at that point to speak to them and tell them what you're looking for. But not only in terms of the research you have already done and you know the name of the material, potentially the kind of weight or feel that you're looking for, but it is really important that you also tell them what you want to make out of this material, because they can perhaps then comment or guide you in the selection of the right material. So it is important that you say to them what kind of product you want to be making, how is the user going to be using this product, especially for those of you creating a product that is performance related, that is sports related. It's really important to give that message to the person that you're speaking to. It is also important to explain to them how you want the fabric to feel. So even if you don't know the technical properties that the fabric should have, just by describing the touch, how the fabric should be touching, how it should be feeling, when touched, when worn, when used, etc. These are all characteristics of the material that when you speak to someone who is professional, would be able to pick up from your language and guide you and steer you in the right direction of helping you find the right material for your product idea. It is also important at this point, as you're discussing your material, to find out, if you don't know, to find out from the person you're speaking to with regards to tests, this fabric should be performing or passing, especially, again, if you are dealing with products for the kids market, for the baby market, performance market, etc. So it's really important that you give as much information, as much as clear information you can to the person you're speaking to, in order for them to be able to understand what is it that you're ultimately wanting to achieve with the fabric that you're looking for, and be able to recommend you or show you the right fabric. Tip number 3 is where to find it. Most people say, well, it's all good and well, Desi, to research, what I want and find swatches, but where do I go and find this fabric? So that is not as hard as it may seem to you. Now, if you are living in one of the big fashion capitals like London, Paris, New York, etc., then your job is easier, because in these big cities, And also secondary cities, very often you will have hubs, districts that most of the fashion industry would be, the supplies to the fashion industry would be kind of huddled together, and they would have offices, shops, etc. Together. So very often you can find in those places wholesaler shops. You can find in those places potentially offices for agents who represent various suppliers, fabric suppliers from even different countries. Very often agents represent suppliers of different countries, but the same type of materials. So this, ideally, if you live in a city like this, ideally that should be your first port of call. You should find out where is the relevant fashion district, and you can Google it and find the people who are located around there. Or even if you find one shop, you can ask them for the next step, who else is around in the area that you can potentially go and visit. If you are not living in a city that has such a fashion wholesalers district, go online. There's quite a lot of portals nowadays via which you can find and source materials. Things like fabricexchange.com, that's one online portal. Another one potentially can be nickoftime.net, I believe it is called, but if you Google it, you'll find it. Nickotime.net. And through them, you can find materials. Now, what is really important here is that you try to find places that specialize in the type of material that you're looking for and have more than just one, rather than going to a place that has all kinds of variations of fabric and potentially what you're looking for, they might just find at the back of the room in just one article, and then you might not get a repeat order. So it's important when you're looking and speaking to this, whether it's in-person or online places, that you inquire as to the type of regularity they get of this fabric. It's important that you find out the selection they have. Is it just one, or do they have a selection of this type of material, different weights, different price points, etc. A third place where you can find fabrics is trade fairs. There's trade fairs for raw materials that happen all around the world at different times of the year. But perhaps one of the better known ones is Premier Vision, located in Paris. And it takes place twice per year. It takes place usually in February and in September, close to the fashion weeks. And it is a fair that just about everyone and anyone in the industry goes to. And it's a great time for you to go and source. Or even if you don't know potentially what you might not need in the future, it's a place where you can go and meet people, do your research, initial research, get swatches. And if you document it well, in the future, you can be referring to these swatches and contacting those suppliers for further information, etc. So wholesaler shops, online portals, and trade fairs are the best places for you to find suppliers for materials when you are looking for one. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, it is really important, regardless of the method of where you find your material, it's really important to gather information from the supplier with regards to whether the availability of this fabric for the future. When you're first starting out, or when you want to develop a new idea, it is advisable that you only buy what you need. Now, most fabrics come in a width of a standard width, which is around 140 to 150 centimeters. That is roughly 59, 60 inches. And so really, if you're just developing one sample, you can, all you need is like 1, 2, 3 meters maximum, perhaps. If you're developing from the same fabric a collection, you might need a few more meters. But the point here is that if you buy from a supplier a fabric, just enough to make your sample, so your initial collection, but this fabric is not available for repeat, then you wouldn't be able to sell your collection, you wouldn't be able to repeat. So it's very important that you find out from your supplier, is this fabric easily and regularly available on repeat, and you can therefore buy more in the future as and when you need it. Or if you fall in love with a fabric that is just end of line, it's being discontinued, there's only a few meters available, and perhaps it will not be made again unless they have a proper big order from a large customer. Perhaps then in that case, it's important for you to consider the possibility of launching, limited edition collection. If you really love the material, just get what you perhaps would need to make a limited collection and just launch with that. But at least from the beginning, you know that that is not fabric that will be available on repeat. So it's really important at this point to inquire this. Tip number 4 here, it's important to mention minimum order quantity. Most suppliers you would work with would have a sampling minimum, and then they would have minimum order quantity required for production. And when you deal with fabric, very often, unless the fabric is a stock fabric, i.e. fabric that is in the collection of the supplier, and it's a basic fabric that they continuously make, and therefore they have potentially a color card, which they offer to customers to constantly buy in smaller quantities. If that fabric that you have selected is not a stock fabric, that means that you would have to commit to a larger quantity to buy when it comes to production. And that can be a few hundred meters. So if you're not geared up for that amount, to buy that amount of material, because you don't need simply hundreds of meters to make a collection, perhaps then inquire what the sampling quantity is. Sometimes it's possible just by buying a sampling quantity to actually not only use it to sample, but actually to even make your production out of it. So that's a good tip to bear in mind. And the price, depending where you buy your fabric from, the price can be negotiated. Sometimes from some places like, for instance, physical shops, wholesaling shops, perhaps you might not be able to negotiate much with the price there. But if you're talking to a supplier, especially a trade show, find out what are the price breaks. Sometimes you have price breaks if you pay in advance. Sometimes you have small reductions if you buy a certain quantity. And the more you buy, sometimes, the price changes. So find out what are the options. Very often, prices can be within reason negotiated. So these are my top tips for you for when you are sourcing fabrics from down the wholesaler route. It's important, just to recap, is that you research at the beginning, that you're very clear when you speak to your suppliers how you're going to use the fabric and what you need it for, what's the end use of the fabric. It is important that you know where to go and find the fabric, the different places available to you near and further afield. And then to discuss with them minimum order quantities for sampling and production, as well as prices and how do the prices change as you order in the future. So I hope this was useful. Drop me some comments drop me some feedback in the comments below. If you have any questions, drop them in there. If you have any suppliers that you've had great experience from as well, share the information below. It is not so easy. It should be easier, but it is not so easy sometimes to find information of wholesalers. So sharing is caring. If you have great experiences with particular wholesalers for fabric, just pop them in the comments below. Let others find it, and for good people to find good business. So if you like this video, give us the thumbs up, give us some feedback and some love, and subscribe to our channel so you get notified when we release more videos. Until the next time, thank you.